Good evening, everyone. I'd like to call the Board of Selectmen special meeting for Tuesday, March 13th, 2018 to order. We have two items of business in front of us here this evening. The first of which is to conduct a public hearing to receive public comment on the enactment of a hydraulic fracturing and extraction waste prohibition ordinance. And the second is to consider and take possible action on the enactment of that same ordinance. This board unanimously moved a couple of weeks ago, moved to a public hearing, and I think to an individual it was with full support of moving this ordinance and enacting this ordinance. This evening what we want to do is ensure that that is what most of the public expects from us and expects for this community. So the hearing is designed to get your input, and we certainly welcome anyone's comments. Just in terms of the ground rules, come on up to the podium, state your name and address for the record. If you have specific questions about the ordinance itself, let me just say this was a sample ordinance that was put together and used in some other communities throughout the state of Connecticut, and it is our understanding that it was modified and tweaked in many of those communities that conform with the style and form of their ordinances and their bid processes. So there were some changes to the original document we put together. If there are any questions related to that, Town Attorney Peter Barrett is here and can certainly answer those questions, because for years I played an attorney on TV and I really wasn't an attorney. With that, I'll open up. Any other board members want to say anything prior to the comments at this point? None? With that, we'll entertain comments from the public. So, Terry? Up here at the microphone, at the podium, please.
Good evening. First of all, I'm Terry Kane at 1613 Corners Road here in Guilford, and I would like to thank Matt Hoey and the Board of Selectmen for holding this hearing and for supporting the ban on fracking waste. I just have a very brief comment to make. Some of you may have read in this Sunday's New York Times a piece by Pagan Kennedy. It was entitled, "No Magic Pill Will Get You to 100. As it turns out, a host of longevity scientists have died relatively young, despite the special diet, special supplements, and so forth and so on designed to increase lifespan. And this led Ms. Kennedy to ask, how much do our own individual choices really matter? So she dove into this research and she turned up some interesting, if not surprising, facts, like the fact that our exposure to pollution, which we tend not to think about too much, actually has a greater impact on our lifespans than the more personal choices that we so obsessively take to heart, such as, like, let's just say how many cups of green tea do we have to drink every day as an antioxidant to ward off cancer. So, in other words, the decisions we make collectively, have the biggest impacts on our health. And then she goes on to conclude this. That is why we should all fight for other people's health. Your decisions can affect when I die, and vice versa. This is what the impact is then, as applied to passing an ordinance to ban fracking waste in Guilford. So this is what I believe, that we have a calling to protect our neighbors from exposure to chemicals, radioactivity that research has shown can cause and does cause leukemia, lymphoma, breast cancer, bone cancer, birth defects, and other health issues. 2, we have a responsibility to plan for the future by reducing the risks to our local economy that would arise from possible remediation and restitution expenditures if products from fracking wastes contaminated our town. And last, I believe we have a duty to protect our natural resources for ourselves and for future generations. I urge you, our Board of Selectmen, to pass this ordinance to ban fracking waste in Guilford. Thank you again.
Whoops. Good evening. My name is Patty Chamberlain, 333 Northwood Drive. And I've been participating in the finding out information about the fracking waste. And it's reminded me of when we moved here and built our own house here up in Northwood Drive, North Guilford, on some granite. And a few years after we had arrived, we're doing the little testing for radon. And we were pretty high on that list. I can't remember what the numbers were, but they were high enough so that we got a call from the state and then a call from Ira Flato, I believe it was, from Science Friday or whatever it is, saying, whoa, you guys are something. And he came down with his friends in their hazmat suits, and I'm running around with my 3-year-old and my 5-year-old thinking, oh, this is bad. This is really bad. They did a retest, and in fact, we had one of the very highest radon levels in the state. And they helped us get a mitigation system in place, and we test pretty frequently, and we have been way below whatever acceptable levels are since then. My point, obviously, is that we don't see radon. We don't see the potential risks of fracking waste, but that there are people taking responsibility for informing the public and making a really good decision about our future health was certainly instrumental for us. In the case of the radon, so far we're all still alive and relatively healthy. And I'm hoping that as this moves forward in our country, that the idea of banning fracking waste will be pervasive. Thank you.
I'm Carol Rizzolo, 24 Long Hill Farm, and I really want to thank you so much for taking this on. So the more we've learned about the use of fracking waste in the state of Connecticut, I've been pretty appalled to learn that it's used as a de-icer on the roads and as fillers in the roads. We live right up the road from all of the construction work on Long Hill Road rather. And as I watch them spread de-icer on the road or I drive down the highway, I think this is an unregulated chemical soup that's radioactive, that's in our neighborhood, it's in our towns, in our community. So I think anything that we can do here to try to make it just a little bit less, I would really appreciate it. So thanks.
Thank you. Anyone else? Anyone else? Paul?
Paul Rogan, 181 Dunk Rock Road. I've lived in Guilford 30 years. As I always say, tongue-in-cheek, but I'll always be first generation. But I enjoy it here. I rely on the nature. And I've been looking at a Guilford Plan of Conservation and Development from 2015. And it's 88 pages of pretty dense stuff. But I just want to make a reminder. I too appreciate what the Board of Selectmen is doing and the effort to ban fracking waste. I just want to remind you that I think goal number 2 on this very comprehensive report is to conserve Guilford's lands, waters, and natural areas. And I think we got to hold up to this. A couple other small things in here that it talks about, and I support the regional hazard mitigation plan, which I think we've been doing and I'd like to continue to do. And we should do, there was one other thing here and I think it's to do a survey and an assessment, systematically survey watersheds for pollutants that may enter public water with increased stormwater runoff and sea level rise. I think that we've been doing that. We got to keep doing that, more of that. Thank you.
It's Larry Rislow, 24 Long Hill Farm here in Guilford. So what is fracking waste? It's a byproduct of a process, and it's produced by a company that is trying to make money and selling a useful product. But any company, any business tries to externalize its costs. And what it's trying to do is to get rid of one of its big costs, which is how to get rid of this waste. It generates a lot of it. The state of Pennsylvania is one example where this activity goes on, derives a great benefit from the tax income, from employment, helps the economy. And like any business, the state of Pennsylvania wants to externalize its costs. So what is the benefit to us? I haven't heard anyone say, what is the benefit to us? Perhaps it's cheap material to be the undergirding of roads, and perhaps it's cheap material to use as de-icer and all of that. But what are the costs we're bearing for short-term gain? They're long-term costs. When a well is contaminated, it's contaminated, potentially forever. It takes long times to get rid of this stuff. I was at Yale at a time when they built a building on an old gas station, and the efforts they had to go to detoxify the site, it was a long-term process and a very costly process. So what is the gain for us for the huge expense we're going to undertake? Why should we be bailing out the people that are generating this waste? It's their problem. Let them figure it out. So, thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Val Chamberlain, 333 Northwood Drive. My thinking is about why are we doing this on a local level. And I think it's pretty obvious that we're not getting taken care of in terms of the environment from the federal level. And the state doesn't seem to be doing too much. So I'm really encouraged and thankful that we're taking this on locally. And to me, it's an organic thing, and that's where we're putting our efforts now, is putting in organic, and hopefully it bubbles up to the top. And if enough towns enact these ordinances, eventually the state will say, okay, we got to do something. And eventually, if enough states do it, maybe the government says, we got to do something. So I'm very appreciative that we're doing this on a local level, so thank you all.
Anyone else? I just have a question. Come on, please come up to the microphone.
I had a chance to read this in detail. It needs to be
Up to the microphone, name and address.
My name is William Jockin. I live at 46 Graves Avenue. My question is this. In terms of purposes, it says the town of Guilford desires to restrict hydraulic fracking waste as herein defined within the boundaries of the town in order to provide for the health. Then there's section 237-7, transportation. Nothing in this chapter shall be interpreted to ban the transportation of any product or byproduct described herein on any roadway or real property within the town of Guilford. It seems a little inconsistent if you want to minimize or prohibit within the boundaries of the town. This 237-7, and I acknowledge I haven't read the whole thing in detail, seems to have the implication that it can go through the town.
Yeah, and it can, because there are federal regulations that allow for that.
Interstate commerce.
And Pete, again, I'm not going to play the attorney, but Pete, go ahead if you would, please.
I can come up and say you're exactly right from here, and that is the reason.
Okay, yeah, like interstate commerce and all
Right.
of that. But it is an inconsistency that you might have a truck with hydraulic fracking waste come
possible.
and have an accident. You had the oil spill in the Gulf of Mexico, you might have a truck overturn here on icy roads, and you'd have just the same issue of contamination.
But we can't prohibit it by law, because we're prohibited. Pete, you want to talk? Please come on.
I believe actually that paragraph was in fact in the draft that was provided to us and is in the ordinance versions that other towns have passed. And the reason is, as First Selectman Hoey has said, that we have federal regulations and statutes that relate to interstate commerce, and we're not, and those federal and state laws, for that matter, preempt any laws or actions that we can take on a municipal level. So that's why that particular provision has to be in there.
Thank you.
Is that limited to state roads that are, like 95?
Well,
State streets?
that is a question, because any transportation, frankly, we would not want to take on the burden of proving that whatever transportation is occurring is strictly staying within our own little town. So I think that was a prudent thing to include in the initial draft ordinance, and our position here is it should stay there in ours.
So just to be clear, we can't say that it's okay for them to use I-95 on state roads and not local roads for transportation.
Well, there is the field of interstate commerce has been preempted, is the point. Any transportation that could or may relate to interstate commerce is strictly regulated by the federal government. And that includes all of our town roads, because they potentially are involved in, over the history of, and those who are attorneys or pretend to be on TV sometimes, the Interstate Commerce Clause has been broadened to such an extent that it reaches into almost every possible area. It's the way the federal government really became the primary legislative force in our country. But with respect to this particular ordinance, that's why that provision is there. And it is, as I understand it, in the original draft ordinance that was passed in Brantford, I believe, and the other towns as well.
Questions or comments?
When railroad tankers are derailed and there's contamination of materials dangerous to human health, if it should be found that it is an error on the part of the railroad, can there be a fine or a suit pursued in terms of the danger to the community? This would not be impeding interstate commerce, but it might mean that if it's found that an accident occurs that a company is responsible, they can be held accountable. So such a clause like that be in here?
Pete?
Excuse me, that's fine. This provision that we're talking about right now is strictly relates to transportation. What you're talking about is perhaps a spill, okay, or if it ends up on our property or in our road, we have carved out all of our remedies. We have a citation process that we would use on the municipal level. We have a cease and desist order, and we also have specifically stated in this ordinance that is in addition to any other remedies we may have under state or federal law, which to me would include injunction and potentially suits for damages.
Thank you. Hi, Catherine.
Catherine Bradshaw. I'm at 1231 Moose Hill Road. I also want to thank the Board of Selectmen for getting this to this point, but and being in support of it. This is the first time I've looked at the ordinance, and something really jumped out at me, which is that the fine is not to exceed $250. So I just question whether that's going to be enough to deter a large company from saying, oh, well, it doesn't really matter, we're going to come in and do whatever we want to do. I don't want to bog this down and like bring a halt to this, but I did want to raise that as a concern, and I wonder if there's some way of, beyond voting to approve this, to reconsider what that amount is for the fine.
Let me answer your second question first, which is no, if we change anything on this document, it goes back through a process that will, it will obviously create some delays.
Yeah.
This being an ordinance can be modified at some time, at some point in the future. But Pete, if you want to talk to the 250, please.
I'll address that really quickly. I believe the ordinance treats a violation as a per-day violation. So it's a $250 a day violation, enforceable by citation, and as I mentioned before, that's in addition to any other remedies we may have under state or federal law.
Okay.
He needs the exercise. Anyone else with comments or questions? Come on up, please.
Robin Houlihan, 276 Shore Drive. I wasn't anticipating speaking tonight, so I might have to catch my breath. I'm deeply moved by this, and I want to thank you for your reflection. I'm a resident of a lake area. I've raised my son here, and I've been told by those who are caretakers of our waterways from the state that it's the spring-fed lake that we live on is the waters that come from those springs are over 600 years old. That water is pristine and clean and safe. I've been told as recent as last year in a study. One of the safest, cleanest lakes in the state. It's something to be extremely proud of. And I have enjoyed recreating with my family on that lake for many years. I am a 2-time survivor of cancer, and I moved here in 2005 because I wanted to heal, and I wanted to stay healthy, and I moved from New York City, which wasn't exactly a very healthy environment for me, and I had a very conscious decision to live on this lake and raise my family on this lake. So I want to thank you for thinking about that. For all the residents of all the waterways, I thought about what Carol said with the de-icer. Another interesting fact is that all the storm drains in the upper part of Long Hill and throughout that development all go into West Lake. I don't know about that fact with the other lakes in town, but it's deeply disturbing to think about what could go into that lake, and very quickly. So thank you.
Anyone else? Oops, excuse me. Forgot to turn the ringer off.
Somebody's calling in. Can't get it up.
That's our state representative probably calling in. It is, Sean. Anyone else? Going once? Going twice? 3 times, and it's closed. That closes the public hearing. Thank you very much for sharing your sentiments with us. Item 2, consider and take possible action on the enactment of a hydraulic fracturing and extraction waste prohibition ordinance as a result of the public hearing. I would move that we approve the ordinance as it has been written and approved by town council. Is there a second on that?
Second.
Any further discussion, comments?
I have a couple comments.
Sure.
And it's so gratifying to see this many people come out for, an ordinance, right? A town ordinance. This is, normally the kind of stuff that just, gives people a yawn and they pass it on and they're not concerned. So it's great that everybody's engaged. I want to particularly comment on Mr. Rizzolo's observation about the